Wayne Perry, writer of hit songs by artists like Tim McGraw and the Backstreet Boys, dies of throat cancer at the age of 55. He leaves 4 children and an estate valued at over $1 million.
Musically, he was a genius.
But within a week of his death, a legal war is launched.
They claimed that she killed her brother.
Darlene could convert the devil. She was very influential.
The conflict escalates out of control.
I'll kill somebody if they touch my father.
I basically threatened to destroy her as a person.
And pits family against family.
My father's death changed everything. It destroyed our family.
May 15th, 2005, Darrell Wayne Perry lies dying of throat cancer in an Ohio hospital. His second son, Justin, is by his side.
I did exactly what he asked me to do for him if he couldn't do for himself, and that was to read the Bible. He wanted me to read the Word of God to him.
His father has been in a coma for 11 days when Justin remembers his promise.
I looked up after reading the passages that I wanted to read to him, and he had one big, huge crocodile tear coming down his face. And I watched his mouth come open wider than I'd ever seen anybody do it. And he just took the biggest breath, and he never exhaled. Everything slowed down at that point to me. I watched his jugular vein stop. I watched his lips fade.
A grieving Justin contacts his 3 siblings. Wayne Perry fathered 4 children with 3 different women. Justin was born to Stephanie Jones in 1979, and in 1981, she gave birth to Olivia, who is better known as Nikki. In 1993, Perry married Janet McCormick, and in 1994, she gave birth to Perry's youngest child, Christian. The eldest of the 4 siblings, Brian, was born to Perry's first wife, Gail Winkler, in 1970. Brian is at his home in Washington State when he gets the call.
I was pretty devastated. Justin and I hung up the phone, and I went back to listen to the music because it was music of Dad that I'd never heard before. And I pushed play on that tape deck, and the song started out, "Brian, this song's from your daddy." And the song's called Daddy's Little Boy. And it says, just because I'm not there doesn't mean that I don't care. It lifted everything off of my shoulders at that point.
Perry's will stipulates that his sister, evangelical minister Darlene Bishop, is to be the executrix of his estate. At first, his heirs have no objection to this.
I was fine with that. I was like, man, cool. I trust Darlene. I trusted her to the fullest extent. I was like, absolutely, that's fine.
I was glad that Darlene was in charge because Darlene hadn't done anything at that point to prove to me that she was the wolf in sheep's clothing. I still thought that she's Pastor Darlene Bishop. She's a woman of God. She's not going to do anything wrong.
Perry's children believe that the total value of his estate is around $1 million. It consists of a $260,000 life insurance policy, as well as a family trust that is set up to pay each of his children a monthly stipend. The trust is funded by royalties from Perry's songwriting catalog, an impressive list of country and pop tunes like the #1 smash hit for Tim McGraw, Not a Moment Too Soon, and hits by Toby Keith, George Strait, and the Backstreet Boys, among others.
He could go into a recording studio and completely take over the whole situation within 5 minutes, fix a train wreck that's actually back on track. Musically, he was a genius.
Darrell Wayne Perry was born in Hamilton, Ohio in 1950 to the wife of a furniture upholsterer. His old friend Randy McNutt remembers that even back in the late 1960s, Perry was ambitious.
Wayne thought he would make it big, and I always had faith in Wayne. I thought Wayne was a terrific talent, and he was. He had played in the area for a long time, even as a young guy, because he started when he was 14. And they called him Little Wayne Perry. His dad found an old upright piano and brought that home, and we'd sit there and bang out songs that we attempted to write.
But after years of toiling away in obscurity, Perry was itching to make his way in the music industry.
I told him, I said, what you need to do is keep writing and probably go to Nashville, because it's the only city in our whole region that would probably accept you for your kind of music. He left in the early 80s, 83, something like that, 82. It didn't last long. He came back after a few months. It was just too much being down there, and it just didn't seem right, so he came back.
But Perry's relentless desire to succeed in the music industry wouldn't let him quit.
And then he decided to go back, and this time it stuck, and he stayed. I remember the first time that when Wayne's first record came out, I was driving, and I turned the radio on. The disc jockey said, "We've got a brand new record from a guy named Wayne Perry. It's called Mr. Bus Driver." And as soon as the bass lines came on, Wayne started freaking out, bopping up and down on his seat, screaming, it's on the radio. And he grabbed me, and I'm driving. I said, "Hold it, I'm trying to drive the car." And we pulled over and just sat there and listened to the whole record on the radio. What a thrill, what a thrill. So you can imagine if that record would have been a big hit, what that would have been like for him at that time.
But the song wasn't a hit. Realizing that Nashville was already full of talented singers, Perry decided to find a different path to success.
He gave up his singing when he was there, and he concentrated totally on songwriting. He decided that songwriting is what he wanted to do.
But breaking into the Nashville music scene was tough work.
Wayne would call and he would say, "Sometimes I just feel like giving up." And I said, "Well, you can't give up, because you were born to do this and you will succeed. It's just going to take you a while. You can't just walk in there and say, 'Here I am,' and you've got a hit song." He said, "Yeah, I know it. And so this would continue, and it went on for several years. I would say Wayne tried on and off for 10 years before he had a hit, which came around 1990 with Holly Dunn, I believe, There Goes My Heart Again. His life changed dramatically in that suddenly he was in demand among songwriters. Hit songwriters would ask him to collaborate.
And Perry's songwriting talents were not limited to the country music genre.
Wayne came to my house one evening. He came home to visit, and he said, "Come out in the car, I've got something I want to play for you." And he had a nice sound system in his car, better than the one I had in the house. And he had cassette tapes, and he popped them in, and he said, "This one's by a group called the Backstreet Boys."
In fact, Perry co-wrote the Backstreet Boys hits "Anywhere for You," "If I Don't Have You," and "No One Else Comes Close." These and many other songwriting credits generated the royalties that Perry was able to leave to his children upon his untimely death. His funeral is presided over by his sister Darlene at the Solid Rock Church in Monroe, Ohio, a massive place of worship that she co-founded with her husband. All of his family members are present, save one. The absence of his eldest son, Brian, marks the beginning of his family disintegration. Brian claims that his father's sister and brothers openly threatened him.
I wasn't able to go to the funeral because they told me that if I showed up, they were going to take me out.
This threat stems from a dispute over Perry's care during the final weeks of his life.
Last time I put Dad in the hospital, he knew and I knew. This was it. And the nurse came in and said, "Do you have a living power of attorney?" And he said, "No." And he pointed at me and he said, "I want Brian. He knows my wishes. He knows what I want to do if something happens to me, and that's the way it's going to be."
This decision will turn out to be a faithful one. Brian will be responsible for the treatment Perry receives in his final days. Justin is still bitter about how it occurred.
Brian waited till my dad signed that document, making him power of attorney over his living will, and then called me and said, "Dad's up here in the hospital. You need to get up here. And that was it.
Perry then slips into a coma. 3 days later, acting on medical advice, Brian exercises his power of attorney.
My father's wishes were that there'll be no resuscitation. There'll be no tubes shoved down my throat. I don't want an oxygen mask on. I don't want IVs stuck in me. I don't want vitamin bags. I don't want any of that. When I slip into a coma, I'm gone. Leave me alone. And that was the hardest thing that I ever had to do.
Perry is removed from all forms of life support. Overwhelmed by the situation, Brian leaves to try and pull himself together. But when he returns, he discovers that his aunt has arrived and things have changed.
I come in the room and there's candles lit in the room and there's people standing around the bed. They're all hand in hand and there's a vitamin bag hanging off the IV rack and the IV's in his arm. And I went down to the nurse's station and I said, "You've got a vitamin bag in him." I said, "I'm going to call a lawyer and I'm going to have you shut down tomorrow."
Brian's threat works, but it leads to a showdown with Darlene.
The nurse came in to throw Darlene out and made everybody leave, and they told me that I was killing my father, that I was heartless, that I was going to burn in hell with Satan, and that I'm the reason that my father's lying in that bed dying, because I didn't want him to have help, because I had no faith, no heart, and no soul.
Brian claims that at this point, things turned ugly.
That started World War III.
In fact, Brian took the threat very seriously.
I drove to my mother's house and got a gun and loaded it. Put it in my pants, picked the kids up from my aunt's house, and I flew out that night. I left. I flew back to Washington State.
Justin supports his brother Brian's decision to remove Perry from life support. He remains by his father's hospital bedside for the next 11 days as his father slowly dies. But Darlene is not done. Several days into Justin's death watch, his aunt arrives with a fellow evangelical minister.
Darlene and Rod Parsley came in his room and said, "We're taking him out of here. Your brother's letting him lay here and die, and we're taking him out of here, and we're taking him to a Baptist hospital in Nashville." And at that point, I can tell them that I'll kill somebody if they touch my father. He's not going anywhere.
The conflict between Perry's children and his sister Darlene reaches boiling point just before his death. After Wayne Perry passes away, Justin and his siblings decide to file suit against their aunt for misappropriating the estate's funds and, far more controversially, for wrongful death.
They claimed that she killed her brother.
If he hadn't listened to Darlene, I think, where would he be today?
Led by oldest son Brian, Wayne Perry's children band together to pursue their aunt through the courts. Among their many accusations, they allege that she misappropriated the estate's funds. Brian lobbies Christian's mother, Janet, to join the suit.
One day, Brian called me and said, "Do you know she took $100,000 from that life insurance policy and she gave it to her daughter to build this house, this $2.2 million house they're building?" To me, that's mishandling funds. That's my son's. She's not using her money, she's using his money. So that's when I joined with them in this, the lawsuit.
And Justin believes that Darlene mishandled other funds as well.
I witnessed her and her attorney walking down the stairs with two buckets. One was full of silver, the other one was full of gold. I flat out told Darlene, "I want to hold on to that because gold is going to triple its value." "Oh, honey, gold ain't gonna do nothing." And they went and sold it anyway. She started doing things her own way.
Darlene's attorney was also the lawyer Wayne Perry hired to help him draft his will and create the family trust. In the coming years, he will represent Darlene in the conflict over the very estate that he helped Perry set up.
You know, it was just ridiculous. He was a conflict of interest under Ohio Rule 1.7. He's represented Darlene against the trust and the four heirs of the trust and was a member of her church. It was just a disaster all the way around the table.
I blame him for a lot of stuff because he shouldn't have represented Darlene Bishop because she was the executor of that trust. There were so many conflicts of interest all the way around.
But the misappropriation of estate funds will be the least of the charges laid against her.
Under the circumstances of how they handled his care, refused his medical treatment because of religious ways of healing that she invented herself. We brought a wrongful death suit against her.
Wrongful death, clergy malpractice, teaching him something and being influential to him in such a way that it cost him his life.
They claimed that she killed her brother, and that part I was never a part of. I only thought that she was misappropriating funds.
This startling accusation is rooted in the events following Perry's cancer diagnosis in 2002. At the time, Perry and Janet were in the process of getting divorced, but despite their separation, the two still spent time together, and that's when Perry learns the bad news.
The doctor called and delivered the news that it was cancer. The first emotion, I think, was shock, and then the second was he was just, he began weeping and just saying, I'm going to beat this. That was his first response.
To a devastated Perry, the proposed treatment sounded worse than the disease.
When he heard what the doctor's plan of action was for him, I think he felt that it was too drastic. They suggested he might have to take part of his vocal cords and possibly, parts of his mouth, his tongue, and that was just, to him, a death sentence because he loved singing, and he loved it probably more or as much as writing.
In his moment of crisis, Perry felt he needed guidance.
He just said, I've got to get back to my sister. So he left and went to Cincinnati.
Wayne's sister, Darlene Bishop, is a well-known Christian minister who delivers high-octane sermons that make extraordinary claims about God's healing powers.
Darlene's a very charismatic motivational speaker, one of the best motivational speakers in the world. She was requested all over the world. She was selling out stadiums in Atlanta.
Darlene could convert the devil. She could walk into any room and take over that room. She could have 15,000 people in her congregation and every one of them get super excited. She's an entertainer. She's very good at what she does.
But in the 1980s, her recovery from breast cancer changed everything. From then on, her sermons had a new subject.
She was claiming that one day she had woke up and that she was bleeding from her breast, and that she laid over the bathtub and prayed for like 9 days and bled for 9 days from her breast. And all of a sudden one day it stopped. God had finally came through and healed her of breast cancer.
Like his sister, Perry has a strong religious faith. This faith will have a serious impact on his healthcare decisions.
He said, Darlene's told me I need to move in with her. She's going to help me. She's going to help me get better. She's going to help me get through this. And he ended up selling his log home that he worked his whole life for, 25 acres of land, auctioned off everything he owned, and moved to her house. I was completely disagreeing with that, of course. I told him that I don't think that's a wise decision. Nashville has some of the greatest hospitals in the United States. And then that's when he came out with the fact that he said that he wasn't going to receive surgery. He was not going to receive chemotherapy, that he was going to rely on God and the prayers of Darlene's church to heal him.
Prayer is great because it gives people faith and hope, but our Creator made us intelligent enough to create medicine. It's there for a reason. There's no cure for cancer, but survival rates are increased dramatically by going through what your oncologist tells you to do. So I think it was a joke, and I tried to explain that to him. He's like, well, Darlene's working on healing me. And I was like, no, she's not either. You need to get your butt to the doctor and get your chemotherapy, get your radiation. That was the biggest mistake of his life, was allowing her to come in and take him to Ohio. He was up there and she wanted to be in control of everything.
No one told Wayne what to do. He was his own person. He's very opinionated, and he controlled himself and, anybody else around him really, but he made his own decision in everything. He, I think, felt like she had beaten cancer, according to her, and that he thought, if she beat it, I can too.
Realizing that he can't change his father's mind, Justin decides to take on the role of caregiver and moves into Darlene's as well.
I didn't want my dad to be by himself. I wouldn't want nobody to be by themselves during that time period. And Darlene goes on tour all the time. She's never there, and they needed someone there, and I'd rather me do it than a stranger.
Relying on prayer alone, Perry's condition steadily worsens.
He would keep a fever all night long. While he slept, he would change out. I had to change out his clothes sometimes twice a night. He was constantly running a fever. He went through a bottle of children's Tylenol a day. I bathed my father. I fed my father. I clothed my father. I washed my father's clothes. I cleaned up after my father.
By early 2003, 9 months after his initial diagnosis, he weighs only 80 pounds. And as he grows sicker, he grows angrier.
He got a point one time, and this was the biggest memory of my father. He was just running like 104 fever. And he all of a sudden just stood up in the air and said, "Where are you? Where are you? Why aren't you helping me?" And started yelling at God and questioning God. And it hurt me. It hurt me inside bad. And I went outside and asked the same thing in my head.
But if prayer doesn't help, neither does yelling.
He started noticing again the masses that were growing on his neck. His lymph nodes started swelling on his neck.
As the months go by, Perry's condition goes from bad to worse, and it seems that his death must be imminent. But is it?
He looked like the Wayne of, a few years earlier. And I thought, wow, this is incredible.
She exploited his body on big screen televisions, sitting on this stage through a miraculous cure of her work through God.
By early 2003, Wayne's condition has become critical.
All of a sudden, my dad fell out entirely. He started suffocating. His throat had closed up on him entirely to where he couldn't even breathe. And they had to do an emergency tracheotomy.
At last, fearing for his life, Perry is willing to try conventional medical treatment.
After that point, he did begin radiation, he did begin chemotherapy, and began getting blood transfusions and everything that was necessary to keep him alive a little longer.
I guess he found a little bit of energy and hope left, to will to fight, to want to live, and he got better.
His body reacts extremely well to the treatments, and within several months, Perry has gained back 50 pounds.
His recovery went well. I had him drinking ensues every day and broths, and he got better. He woke up on Christmas Day and said, "I feel like I can eat some biscuits and gravy." And Darlene made him biscuits and gravy, and we all sit there scared to death because I thought he was going to choke. And he sat there and ate that whole plate of food. And of course, Darlene was, thank you, God.
Soon, Perry is feeling well enough to invite his old friend Randy McNutt out to dinner.
I was shocked to see him walking towards me at the restaurant. He looked like the Wayne of, a few years earlier. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. And his spirits were good. He was positive and making plans to write more songs, and it made me feel good to see him talking about music again. He had a new CD album that he'd recorded, a gospel album, and he gave me a copy, and he said, "I just went to give my doctor a copy." And he talked briefly about what his doctor had done for him, and he also told me that he had been praying, and he thought that helped.
But to Justin's dismay, Perry takes his recovery one step further.
He had quit his treatments entirely, had stopped radiation, stopped chemotherapy, stopped taking antibiotics. He stopped everything because he felt, again, that he was healed completely.
And then Perry and Darlene begin to make plans that trouble Justin even more.
Him and Darlene set me down and asked me if I would go with them on a ministry tour to exploit my father's healing and that they wanted me to be there for him in case he has any issues. And I said absolutely not. The doctor had told him he's not able to travel.
But Wayne is in no mood to hear Justin's warnings.
Well, under the influence of Darlene was like, I rebuke that. I'm able to do anything. I'm healed and I'm gonna go live my life.
Justin feels that at this point, Darlene was exploiting Wayne and endangering his health.
She wanted to take him to every church she possibly could and use him as a pivot to somehow further her ministry. She went through this whole story about how he suffered and how he did all this, and then now here's my brother, and the camera panned over and there's my dad, standing there. She used him as a pawn.
She exploited his body on big screen televisions and showing how much weight he had lost and where he's at today, sitting on this stage through a miraculous cure of her work through God.
My father, in all reality, you could tell by looking, and I watched it several times just to make sure he really wasn't down with this, to make sure surely he's not in agreement with this whole process. And he was crying every time that they did show him.
Rather than being exploited, Janet thinks that Perry was acting out of self-interest.
That whole time he was going on this tour, he believed his healing was tied up in how much he professed that he was healed. I really believe that they thought it was a miracle. And so she was speaking and proclaiming his miracle.
According to Janet, for Perry and Darlene, going on tour was a religious act.
Their whole faith base is tied up in their mind and what they think and what they profess. So they had to profess it. They didn't have a choice.
Darlene decides to profess her faith in print. She writes a book titled Your Life Follows Your Words. In it, she talks about Wayne's remarkable recovery, which she attributes to the power of prayer.
And as soon as he got a little better, as soon as he put his weight back on, and he actually ate a food about it, she released a book that said he was healed.
She wrote the book, Your Life Follows Your Words, and she thought, well, I'll tell the world I've cured him of cancer, and that more will come. They'll come by the millions. They'll buy this book because I created a miracle.
Despite Perry's apparent recovery, Justin knows that it can't last long. Back when Perry received his first treatments, the doctor pulled Justin aside.
She said, your father's dying, and he's gonna die. This treatment's not gonna help him, it's not gonna keep him alive, it's only going to extend his life a little bit longer. She said, you need to know that. You're the one taking care of him, you're his son, you need to know that.
A few months after Perry chooses to halt his treatments, his condition begins to worsen again.
You could kind of tell a little bit that it came back because he started losing weight again, and I could see it in his eyes, and I told him, I said, you feeling okay? And he would say he wouldn't say otherwise. Because again, doubt. You can't doubt your faith, and you can't speak things into existence.
I think to speak about the fact that the cancer was not really gone would also allude to the fact that he was not really being healed by God. And somehow that would taint his faith.
But Perry can only avoid the truth for so long. In the spring of 2005, doctors give him the bad news. His cancer is back, and this time it's too late to save him.
Within a couple weeks, he had gotten to the point where he could no longer control his bowel movements. He could no longer get up and feed himself.
It is a tragically ironic coincidence that Darlene's book launches on the same day that Perry's kids receive some very bad news.
The day that the book was released to the world was the day that we received the letter from Dr. Malcolm stating that Wayne was terminally ill with cancer and that there was nothing that could be done for him.
Perry's condition goes downhill so rapidly that on May 4th he slips into a coma and, 11 days later, passes away. In the court case that the Perry's children bring against their aunt, they claim that, in the months leading to Wayne's death, defendant Bishop persuaded Wayne to go to God instead of the hospital to treat his cancer.
If he would ever start saying, Darlene, maybe I should get help, or I'm feeling sick, she would tell him never to speak those words again. Because anything that you speak, she feels, comes to existence.
For his part, Brian believes that Darlene had even darker motives.
Darlene wanted to make my father suffer for his sins of being a songwriter and turning his back on God.
I know there's talk that she didn't encourage him to see a doctor, and that's just not true. She definitely encouraged him to. But she also knows that there are times when you've got to rely on doctors.
But for Brian, Darlene's actions are unforgivable.
They destroyed my father. They took his life and then blamed it on me. The cancer that he had was the most common curable kind of cancer. And the success rate was great. And if he hadn't listened to Darlene, I think where would he be today?
I feel like if my dad would have just done what was right, if my dad would have just got treatment, he would be here today. He would be here right now. I mean, I wouldn't be having to do this interview because my father would be alive. But I believe that he died wrongfully. It's the most healable, commonly curable cancer known to man. And he just let it go until it was no longer curable. It was no longer going back.
They knew Wayne. He made his own decisions. He didn't do anything anybody told him to do. So he believed he was just going to be healed by God. And to do anything outside of just waiting for God to heal him would be to say he had no faith.
But nothing, Janet says, can stop Brian and Justin from including charges of wrongful death and clergy malpractice in their lawsuit against Darlene. And the legal proceedings will generate a stunning revelation.
Her book claims that she cured herself of breast cancer. Her deposition sings a different tune.
The wheels of justice grind slowly, and nearly 2 years pass before the case finally begins to make its way through the courts in early 2007. All those involved are deposed, and to the amazement of Perry's children, during Darlene's deposition, she makes a startling admission.
Her book claims, Your Life Follows Your Words, states that she herself cured herself of breast cancer. Her deposition sings a different tune, says that she never was told by an oncologist that she had cancer. She was never diagnosed with cancer.
And that was even more fuel to the fire for me to stay on board and be like, this woman's wrong and she needs to be shown to the world.
It took me into an anger frenzy at that point, because here she is out on the road lying and deceiving all these people. It was a fraud.
I believe that she had an illness for sure. And I believe God healed her of that illness. And it was in her breast.
In any case, Darlene's revelation has little effect on the court's final decision. On February 12, 2007, after 2 days of hearings, the court renders its judgment. The $100,000 Darlene used to help build her daughter's house came from Perry's life insurance policy. According to the court, this money belongs to Darlene and is not part of Perry's estate. Therefore, she is free to do what she wants with it. Darlene also took $20,000 from the sale of the gold coins, claiming that she was repaying herself for a loan she had earlier given to Perry. Pointing out that the coins made up part of the estate, the judge deems this a misappropriation of funds and orders her to pay back the sum. But all other arguments put forth by Perry's children are summarily rejected, and Darlene is left in charge as executrix of the estate.
Basically, the judge just said, yeah, that wasn't right, but I don't believe she's, out to take the money or steal it, so we're going to keep her as the executor still.
Frustrated, Perry's children prepare to appeal the decision. Dropping all claims of wrongful death, Brian, Justin, and Nikki focus on what they believe to be Darlene's misuse of the estate's funds, especially Perry's $260,000 life insurance policy.
We appealed the fact that the estate had awarded her the sole beneficiary of that life insurance policy, because the trust actually said that all life insurance policies are to be placed in the trust.
By this time, Janet and her son Christian hesitate to take part in the suit. Janet believes Perry had a very different plan for his life insurance.
It was always intended for the life insurance policy to be Christian's. It was actually in my name. And, in case something ever happened to Wayne. But he switched it to Darlene. He should have switched it to Christian. But doing that would make me, because he's a minor child, be in control.
And following their recent divorce, leaving Janet in control was unacceptable to Perry.
I was the ex-wife, and I'm assuming he thought that anything that I was going to be holding in trust for Christian was suspect. I don't know why. I mean, my goodness, ain't nobody loves my son more than me. So, and I just think he didn't trust me because I was the ex-wife.
But Justin doesn't agree that Christian was meant to receive the entirety of the life insurance policy.
It was supposed to go to all of us kids. My dad was a guy that liked to avoid taxes, avoid the man, okay? So he signed that life insurance policy as Darlene is the sole beneficiary. That way it didn't have to run through probate. I was in the room when the conversation took place, and she signed off as beneficiary of that. She said, each one of your kids will get their money. Wayne, you know me. I'd never do your kids wrong, ever.
But Darlene told Janet something different.
He had put the life insurance policy in her name, and was instructed to give that all to Christian. She said, Janet, Wayne wanted Christian to have the life insurance policy. Wayne wanted Christian to have the money. He didn't even want the kids to have anything.
The confusion over Perry's life insurance policy may be rooted in the different relationships he had with his children. For most of his life, Perry had put his career ahead of his family. In fact, he was absent for most of Brian's childhood.
Well, he left my mom and I when I was 2.5 to pursue his music career, and I didn't end up seeing him again until I was 16.
In 1978, the pattern repeated itself when Perry's relentless drive to succeed in the music industry took him away from his second son, Justin.
When I was young, we didn't see that much of him. It was more of a summer and Christmas holidays type thing, because he was always in Nashville working his music as much as possible.
I always believed that he did feel that he spent too much time away from his children there in the early years. But he was driven to do this, to be in the music business.
All this changed in the early 90s when, having settled in Nashville and established himself in the industry, Perry finally settled down.
Whenever I would talk to him, it was just always about music. I wrote this song, this is going on with the music. But then after a while, he remarried, and when he would call me, he would talk more about the children and his wife.
Perry's new wife is Janet McCormick. When she gives birth to Christian in 1994, Perry is at last ready to be a father.
He thought the sun rose and set in Christian's eyes. His kids that he had before, he didn't actually have a hand in raising them, and I think he felt like Christian was his second chance to kind of right all the wrongs. He lit up when Christian smiled, and sometimes I would see him just looking at Christian play and he would cry.
Over the course of their marriage, Janet would gain unique insight into Wayne's relationship with his other children.
That, I think, is one of the demons that kind of haunted him. He didn't want to be known as a father who didn't really have much to do with his kids.
And she would develop sympathy for their experience.
I've never been abandoned as a child, and I don't know what that's like as an adult. I don't think you ever forget, pain that you've gone through as a child. I believe he loved them, but I just believe he always questioned whether or not they were interested just in him or in his fame or his money. And I mean, personally, I believe those kids loved him, and I believe they wanted his affection and his attention, but I mean, the family was just very, very emotional, uncontrollable emotions.
And as Brian, Justin, and Nikki mount their appeal, Janet feels that the family's uncontrollable emotions have gotten the better of them. Acting on behalf of her son Christian, Janet decides to make a radical change of plans and deal with Darlene directly.
I realized at that point the person who was in control was the person that I needed to make amends with, and that was Darlene. She controlled what, kind of financial future for my son. So we made amends.
My dad's custody agreement with Janet stated that if he ever died, that he needed $90,000 in life insurance coverage on himself for Christian.
It is this $90,000 debt of Perry's that Darlene agrees to honor. But the fact that Janet and Christian have dropped out of the suit does nothing to deter Brian, Justin, and Nikki from launching their appeal. On February 4th of 2008, they're back in court. As the legal battle escalates, the conflict spirals out of control.
He threatened to kill her, to destroy her, to own her, to kill anybody she's dealing with.
Dropping all claims of wrongful death, Brian, Justin, and Nikki focus on what they believe to be Darlene's misuse of the estate's funds. On February 4, 2008, after carefully reviewing the case point by point, the appeals court can find no fault with the probate court's original ruling. On the subject of the life insurance policy in particular, the final ruling states, the life insurance proceeds were not part of Perry's probate estate or trust, and that appellee was not required to account for them in her administration of the estate or trust. In other words, the probate court was right to say that the life insurance policy belonged to Darlene, and she could do whatever she wanted with it. Brian tries to rally his siblings for another appeal, but Justin has had enough.
I fired every single attorney we had, which was 28 total, because they wouldn't shut Brian up. Brian kept costing us money, would not leave Darlene alone, kept harassing her every day, was posting things online about her, and he was ruining the lawsuit by defaming her.
You don't win a war by dropping bombs and then apologizing. You win a war by dropping bombs and continue to drop bombs until the enemy surrenders. And she was an enemy.
Justin's decision to drop the lawsuit is swiftly rewarded by Darlene.
She said, you know, you're the only kid that's been here for your father. You're the only one that's showed up and has actually, you know, done this and proved to your father you loved him and all this other stuff. And she said, I'm going to sign over everything to you.
When Brian learns the news, he grows angrier. Although all four of the siblings will receive an equal share of the estate and the royalties generated by Perry's songwriting catalog, Justin is now the administrator of the family trust.
Darlene had told the newspaper media that she had turned the trust over to Justin, and I was furious. I left home and I was in Washington, and I drove around for like 13 hours and decided that I had had enough, and I was going to come to Ohio and take care of the problem and resolve it once and for all, because the legal system was letting me down. I basically threatened to destroy her congregation, destroy her as a preacher, destroy her as a person.
I love my brother at this point. He needs help mentally, in my opinion. He still dwells on it every day of his life and still wants to persecute her. And he's threatened her life several times. He threatened to burn her church down with everybody in it. He threatened to assassinate her. He called her at one of her things. She was all the way in another state somewhere, and he said, I see you, and was threatening her.
I lost grip with reality, and I called my wife and told my wife that I loved her and the children very much, and that I probably would never see them again. And she beat me home, and she hid all my guns, and she called the police because she was concerned about my welfare at that point, because I had snapped. And I ended up spending the night in jail, 13 hours in jail that night for a cool-down session, and made me grab grips with reality.
I mean, he threatened to kill her, to destroy her, to own her, to kill anybody she's dealing with, to, he made all kinds of threats like that. He made a lot of threats he actually followed through with, which was to make this heavily publicized, and he did that for sure.
I did not back down or give up. You know, I had her in 72 newspapers in 24 hours. We were on Geraldo's show, we were on Fox News.
I'll give it to him. He destroyed her reputation, and he destroyed her mentally.
And it's not just Darlene's reputation that's been destroyed. Tensions between Perry's children are stretched to the breaking point over the issue of his songwriting catalog.
All four of his children, where we all have an equal share in the catalog as far as ownership, but I'm the one who signs off on everything. When a song gets placed, or if there's a license that needs to be filed, I have to be the one to handle that.
Justin has to be in control of everything. He thinks he's in charge of everything. I wish him the best of luck on everything that he is doing. But we all have to be in agreement with whatever it is that he wants to do. for the catalog.
I don't think Justin being in charge is any better than Darlene, if you want to know the truth about it, because we knew prior to Justin taking over that there was about $30,000 to $35,000 of income being generated, and now we haven't seen anything.
I don't trust Justin. I'm sorry, but I'm not an idiot. I want bank records that tells me exactly what has transpired in my trust.
Still a mess. I count on nothing.
Everybody's still making $15,000, $20,000 a year in the trust, and it's working it. I'm working it every day. The catalog's still generating money to this day. Everybody gets their equal share of what happens. I don't take anything extra for doing what I do. I have to deal with my brother, and that's, I should get paid for that, but I don't.
The royalties generated by the songwriting catalog amount to one part of the trust, but the rest of it is a tiny fraction of what Perry's children expected to inherit.
When we received the trust, there was $58,000 in there. I think we received somewhere in the ballpark of $14,000 total.
Ironically, almost all of the estate funds have gone to pay for Darlene's legal fees.
I asked her, I wish you would have just split the money between the kids. And I think she said they probably would have sued me anyways. And you know what? They probably would have.
The trust states that if any of the heirs come against the trustee, that she's allowed to use the funds in the trust to defend herself.
If I were in that same position, I would have used the money too to defend myself. I really would have.
And it remains unclear how much money Darlene did end up using.
My father had $1 million estate when he died. And that's what it was $1 million estate, including his home and his assets and his catalog and everything like that. It was $1 million estate.
To this day, we still do not know how much money was in the trust, how much money funded the trust, how much money was taken from the trust.
In June of 2010, a strange event takes place at Darlene's church, an event that some choose to link directly to the story of Wayne Perry's estate. The statue of Jesus standing in front of the solid rock church is struck by lightning and burns to the ground.
You know, God works in mysterious ways. Our Creator is very, very, very funny. He's got a sense of humor. God struck that Jesus with lightning and burned it to the ground.
I felt like for the first time in my life that God was actually paying attention. That there was really somebody out here watching and said, you've gone far enough, Darlene. You've taken advantage of too many people's lives.
But for Justin, this event does nothing to repair the damage that's been done.
I forgave Darlene 100%. I don't forget anything. I forgot none of it. No, I don't go to her house on Christmas like I used to. No, I don't go over and have dinner and hang out with the kids and go to the church, nothing like that. So it's completely changed. My father's death changed everything. It destroyed our family.
And Brian remains deeply bitter toward both Darlene and her attorney.
Me knowing my dad, me being a lot like my father, if he could get out of that casket and get his hands around Darlene in his neck, he'd probably choke them until they were both dead. Because that's not what he wanted. Didn't want that for Christian, didn't want that for Nikki, didn't want that for Justin. He sure didn't want it for me. I mean, it's been a life of hell.
Janet believes that the responsibility for the estate battle does not rest with Darlene.
I think she didn't want this position either. She did say, Lord, Wayne, please give it to somebody else. I don't want to have to deal with kids. But I think at the time she was also very torn with, wanting to do what her brother wanted. So yeah, I think she was thrown in a difficult position, and I think she made some mistakes. I think she knows she made some mistakes. But I look and try to put myself in her shoes. I don't know if I would have done it any different. And so I can't blame her. I have to blame Wayne. He set it up that way.